Welcome to the Weekly Defence Podcast, the show about defence procurement and military technology. We're brought to you in partnership with our sponsor Namo, and I'm your host, Tony Skinner. On the show this week, we take a deep dive into the world of artificial intelligence and look at how that technology is finding its way into the military. We speak to regular contributor Tim Fish about the role of the frigate in modern navies and how it's changing warfare. And our sponsor Namo provides this week's Industry Voice segment. But first, our weekly news roundup, and I'm joined by Air Editor Tim Martin.
Hi, Tony.
Land reporter Flavia Camargos Pereira.
Hello, Tony.
But just to kick things off, guys, Flavia, if we perhaps turn to you first of all. We heard from you last week. You kind of gave a roundup of sort of regional responses to the Iranian crisis. You've got an interesting background, I guess, in the fact that you've come from the Brazilian Armed Forces originally, but you've transitioned to journalism and you're obviously here as a reporter. How is the Brazilian Armed Forces looking to sort of modernise, what kind of technologies are they looking to procure?
Yes, as you said, I come from Brazil. I was in military there in the last 10 years. I was in Brazilian Air Force and in Brazilian Navy, so I have stronger knowledge about Brazilian Armed Forces and about Latin American as well. And I'm here in London since 2018. I arrived here to study, and I concluded a master's degree in international journalism here.
So, yeah, I mean, obviously it's a very, very different world sort of being on this side, reporting on what's going on. Clearly your background gives you sort of some insight into, the Brazilian sort of armed forces, obviously, and what the kind of procurement priorities are. From a sort of overarching perspective, how are they looking to modernise and what kind of capabilities are they looking for?
Yeah, at the first moment, I would say something about Brazilian Air Force. And Brazilian Air Force has two primary defense programs. The KC-390, that's it's been developed as a joint venture between the Air Force and the Embraer, that's a Brazilian company as well. And this airplane, it can carry out various missions, such as humanitarian support, medical evacuation, search and rescue missions, forest fire fighting. It will be relevant because every year we have problems with fires in Brazilian North, in the Amazon rainforest area, and also this airplane it can carry out missions that include troop transport and cargo transportation as well. And according to Embraer, this airplane, it presents the lowest life cycle cost in the market, what is important as well for Brazilian Air Force. Another relevant defense program is the FX2 that's been carried out with Saab. It began in 2014 when Brazilian Air Force signed a contract to buy warplanes Gripen. This contract, it includes the development and the production of 36 fighter aircrafts. And 15 aircrafts will be produced in Brazil, and probably some of them will be used as well in an Anápolis Air Base to provide aerial security to Brasília, that's Brazilian capital. In the case of the Brazilian Army has an interesting project that's called CISFRON. It means Integrated Border Monitoring System. It's an integrated set of technology resource. It includes surveillance, monitoring systems, information technology, electronic warfare, and intelligence systems. This project it's important because Brazil has 17,000 kilometers of borders with 10 countries. And this area basically, especially in Brazilian North, it's covered with the Amazon rainforest, and it's an area that drug dealers and criminals they use to practice their activities. Then they are trying to use the forest to cover themselves. And another interesting program from Brazilian Army is the Armored Vehicles Guarani. Guarani means it's the name of indigenous tribe in Brazil, and it means fighter, brave. And the project was developed by the Brazilian Army Department of Science and Technology. It began in 2017, and this program, it includes different types of vehicles, and they will replace the models Urutu and Cascavel that have been used for around 30 years in Brazilian Army. And the first vehicle developed is the Guarani Wheeled Military Troop Armored Vehicle. It's interesting to highlight that 90% of the spare parts of this project came from Brazil, and it included 125 suppliers. Basically, this vehicle has national technology, and they are carrying out this project with national technology. And around 400 units were built until now.
So I guess that was another trend that we've seen kind of attending the LAD exhibition. When we first started going, it was all international companies predominantly sort of selling into Brazil, and over the years, more and more Brazilian companies have, they've grown and have more and more capabilities, and armored vehicles, I guess, would be an example of that.
Yeah, basically, Brazilian government is trying to improve the national defense industry, trying to every big project that Brazilian Ministry of Defense took part, it had some transfer of technology. I think it's interesting because it's creating positions, it's creating jobs in Brazil, it's improving the national defense industry, and it's a good way to improve the military actuation as well, the military area in Brazil. And about the Brazilian Navy, Brazilian Navy has a big project that's called ProSub. It means submarine program. This program, it includes the construction of 4 conventional submarines and the first Brazilian nuclear submarine. This project, it's carrying out with French technology. They used the Scorpion model as basis. Brazilian submarine will have, especially the nuclear one, it will have difference, but the basis is the Scorpion model. And also this project, they included transfer of technology. The exception is the nuclear technology that is being developed by Brazilian Navy. And by 2029, the nuclear submarine, it will be concluded, and it's just interesting to highlight it's nuclear, the propulsion. It's not armed with nuclear weapons.
Sure. Obviously, the submarine itself is this very strategic type of platform, kind of the flagship of, I guess, many navies. When you talk about a nuclear propulsion sort of capability, you can sort of see why that's important to the Navy.
Yeah, it's so important because the submarine could be more time navigating, and could be more time without return to the bases, could carry out different missions, longer missions, and for a country with a long coast, it's extremely relevant.
Cool, Flavia. Thank you. Well, again, welcome on board, and I'm sure listeners will see you around the major exhibitions throughout the year. Tim has been sitting there quietly. I know he's full of excitement. Part of what we do here, I guess, is tracking procurements, looking at programs, writing about various milestones. The pinnacle of that, I guess, when we do get excited is when somebody wins at the end of the day. And Tim, there was a kind of a big winner in the helicopter arena this week.
This one will be hard to miss, I think. So the main story of the week from our side has been that, of course, Leonardo has won the US Navy's training helicopter program with their offer of the TH119, and that saw off competition from the Airbus H135 and Bell's 407 GXI. So to get down to the nitty-gritty of the contract details, the the manufacturer, Leonardo, has been given 176 million for 32 aircraft to begin with, and then a full budget cost for 130 aircraft was published as 648 million, and all of those aircraft are to succeed the legacy TH-57 Sea Ranger.
So, I mean, Leonardo, obviously, they do have a facility within Philadelphia, so they could probably rightfully say they're an American company, but they have kind of beaten sort of Bell, who are the incumbents. Would you think this is a surprise that they've won?
Yeah, I think so. Certainly it took quite a few people by surprise, but I also think that beyond the actual selection, the costs involved are perhaps more of a kind of a surprising factor in all of this, because Leonardo came in at just under 265 million below the US DoD's original budget of 913 million. So we can't obviously say for sure that just that alone was enough to swing it. But the US Navy, when I spoke to them, did say that in terms of how they judged the competition, they said that Leonardo's offer represented best value, and that was determined obviously after the RFP submissions, and then the Navy holding 5-day systems like performance flight demonstrations with each of the industry competitors. Should also say that was mentioned that there was 5 competitors who were involved, so Leonardo, Airbus and Bell, and 2 others undisclosed at the moment, so anyone's guess as to who those mystery participants
are. A limited
are,
number of people,
exactly.
Unless somebody's gone ahead and made a helicopter in their backyard or whatever. This is kind of a bit of a trend for Leonardo. They had a recent win on the Air Force side, US Air Force side, right?
Yeah, that's right. I think, a bit of a winning habit, I suppose you could call it, for Leonardo, because as you mentioned, they took the spoils for the United States Air Force UH-1N Huey replacement, so that's 84 airframes to be produced. But I suppose Leonardo can point to the fact that they've gone it alone here. The MH-139, which is for the UH 1N Huey replacement, is of course a partnership with Boeing, but the TH-119 is an airframe made solely by Leonardo, and as you mentioned as well, that'll ramp up the production line in Philadelphia, and it all stands to what they've been doing behind the scenes and working to kind of secure business within America, rather than kind of being seen as this is a European win, so to speak.
So I guess this being the US, and protests seem to be a natural part of the procurement process. I mean, those that have not won, have they kind of indicated what their next steps are? Would we expect a protest, do you think, or is it sort of too early to talk about that?
Yeah, I attempted to tease that out and kind of my line of questioning with Airbus and Bell in particular. Airbus said that they'd have a debrief with the US Navy and wait to see what comes from that. So we can read from that they're certainly not ruling it out. Bell didn't make any comment on the matter, so kind of remains to be seen. But yeah, as is typical with these things, I maybe give it within the 30 days, and we see how it develops. And maybe, potentially, and I wouldn't want to speculate, of course, but with the issue of money, could that be a grounds for an appeal? We may find out if the GAO consider a protest further down the line, but that's maybe for another time.
So great win for Leonardo on that front. Again, that was a program I guess we were tracking for a number of years. What else has kind of come across your desk this week?
Yeah, so I think last week and this week in particular, Finland's HX challenge is going on, which is part of the wider HX fighter programme, and that's Finland's Air Force search for a replacement of their FA-18 CD mixed fleet. So they have, I think it's 55 of the C variant and then 7 of the D. And so all of the candidates that have put forward offers are going to be given the opportunity to to put their aircraft through live test demonstrations, so a week each for all 5 candidates. Eurofighter was last week, and then beyond that we'll have Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Dassault and BAE Systems and Saab all involved, and respectfully that is the Gripen, then the FA-18 EF and the F-35 Rafale, and then Eurofighter.
So interesting sort of mix there. It's sort of, US, European, 5th generation, 4th generation, 6th generation.
Yep,
4th generation and 5th generation.
4th and 5th, certainly, yeah.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Yeah.
A wide range of kind of platforms there to choose from.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it is actually quite an interesting way to do things. I think Finland have set this up, in a fairly sensible manner. Have the paperwork on one side, and here's the military capabilities that we're looking for, and negotiate price with the competitors, and on the other side, don't just give us the data that you say the aircraft's capable of and things like that. Let's field it in finished conditions, in -1 temperatures and beyond, and let's see really what each of the aircraft is capable. Because of course you want a first-hand look to understand how well it's suited to matching your country's your needs, rather than how it's done maybe with others, which is we'll go off what you're telling us, and we'll have a look at maybe what allies have been doing in the past.
So when are we expecting a decision on this particular one?
Yeah, so there's a little way to run on it. So as I mentioned, it's kind of split between the challenge, the HX challenge, which is the live testing side of things, and then the admin. So there's an revised RFQ, I should say, out at the minute, and that's going. Their proposals are being accepted until the 31st of January, but ultimately the crucial decision will be taken next year, 2021. Mm-hmm. So yeah, a bit more to run on that one, but certainly one to keep track of for sure.
And just for mine, I guess the reason I'm sat in the hot seat this week is that Richard Thomas is away at Surface Navy in Washington, D.C. So we'll certainly hear more about that show next week. So a Brazilian, an Irishman and a New Zealander walking into a London recording studio seems like the start of a really good joke.
Absolutely.
So for more information on all these stories, please do visit the Shephard Media website, and the links will also be included in the show notes. Coming up on the podcast, we hear from Professor Paul Britton, who is the Chief Scientist at L3 Harris, about his view of how artificial intelligence, machine learning, is going to change the battlefield of the future. But first, I jump on a call with Tim Fish, who's our regular contributor on the naval side, and we talk about all things to do with frigates.
While the podcast is a newer venture for Shephard Media, we've actually been in the defence publishing business for almost 40 years and have built up a strong and loyal audience base. Our content is trusted and consumed by key decision makers through Shephard Media's multiple channels. One benefit of having such a dedicated audience base is our ability to offer a comprehensive range of message delivery options to our advertisers. From brand awareness campaigns across a combination of print and digital media, through targeted email campaigns or show dailies, to a multitude of online opportunities, or even advertising opportunities within the podcast itself. If you'd like to know more, please visit shepherdmedia.com/advertising.
So on the line now is Tim Fish. Tim is one of our regular contributors who's recently filed quite a nice article on the changing role of the frigate in the modern navies. But I think, Tim, this is your first time on the Weekly Defence podcast.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, first timer.
So welcome aboard. But yeah, I guess just to sort of set the scene a little bit for the listeners, Tim's a former staffer here at Shephard. You were doing the land warfare portfolio, but everyone knows that, the naval sphere is kind of closer to your heart. And now you're living out of Auckland. You're a freelance, regular freelance contributor for us. So, and I think this was the article you filed. It was one of the few times I've seen our managing editor get excited in terms of the themes that you're hitting and some of the controversy that the analysts were sort of chatting about. So maybe just get started. I mean, what sort of story did you were you approaching here, and what kind of themes are coming out of the frigate sector in particular?
Yeah, the article is looking at the kind of changing role of the frigate and how that's impacting kind of the designs that are out there at the moment. So it kind of looked at how the shift in the strategic landscape has changed and how frigates are responding to that in terms of size, weapons outfits, all the programs that are out there at the moment, and if they're able to approach the new environment in a cost-effective manner.
Mm-hmm. So I guess some of the older vessels were more tailored for the sort of Cold War or post-Cold War sort of environment. So, was it a case that those vessels were sort of at the lower end of the spectrum, and what we're seeing now is kind of increasingly complex sort of platforms?
It's kind of a mixture of both. A lot of navies at the moment have frigates that were built in the sort of latter stages of the Cold War, kind of the mid to late 80s. Some a bit older than that, and they're starting to finally replace those. Some have replaced them already. Some are at the beginning of that process. And what it was is that frigates in the Cold War era were a lot smaller. They were very specialised. They're very high-end frigates. They were very complex ships. They weren't simple by any stretch of the imagination. But they were very single-rolled. So they focused on ASW, mainly anti-submarine warfare rather, and just had that one single role, and some had a slight general purpose role as well. Now, what's happened since then is that ships, with the end of the Cold War, that anti-submarine warfare role had kind of disappeared. They didn't need to be escorting ships across the Atlantic to sort of reinforce Europe. So, in terms to address the kind of more a wider range of threat scenarios, ships have become more multi-purpose in nature. So not only do they need a higher quality ASW capability, they need better anti-air warfare, anti-surface warfare capabilities as well. So that makes them more of a multi-purpose ship. Unfortunately, it means they're a lot larger and also more expensive as well. And after the end of the Cold War, there were a lot of cuts in the defence budgets across Europe and in the US. So the numbers of ships in a fleet, including the number of frigates, has gone down a lot. So you have smaller numbers of ships, very capable but very expensive at the same time. So it's about how navies are trying to manage those competing demands.
So I can hear your daughter in the background there. So hopefully we're not taking you away from your parenting duties too much. I mean, are we sort of in a situation where it's the classic quantity versus quality debate? Having sort of cheaper platforms, but being able to sort of field, get the coverage that way. Thinking of the sort of the Type 31E in the UK, I guess is aimed at that sort of lower ends part of the market.
Yeah, that's right. The navies, modern navies, are trying to meet the challenge of reduced budgets and maintain their capability by kind of pushing a two-tier fleet. So in terms of frigates, so they have the higher end frigates, which will do the ASW capabilities and the anti-air warfare capabilities, but then also a lower end capability in smaller, cheaper frigates that can do more of the constabulary tasks. So you can see this with the French Navy. They've got their FREM frigate, and then now they're pursuing the FTI frigate program, which is a lower end, a smaller frigate. Although actually that frigate has got quite high-end capabilities. The Italians have got FREM as well, but they're also going for the PPA program, which has got some frigate kind of capabilities within that as a sort of very large OPV. And then the Royal Navy. So the UK is getting its Type 26 frigates, but they're also going for the Type 31E frigate as well. So these navies are now going for splitting off into two types of frigates, a high end and a sort of low end one. Although they are very much tailored to the kind of capabilities that each navy wants as well. So, but that kind of split is something, I guess, it's particularly new for the Royal Navy, because the UK has always gone for a homogenous one set of very high end frigates, but now they're being forced to kind of diverge into two separate types of frigates there.
Sure. I guess one of the other aspects of the article that sort of sprung out to me was I think there was a comment from an analyst, I guess an academic, about the fact that new technologies were potentially going to make frigates obsolete. You think about autonomy, unmanned systems, are likely to make more large, expensive platforms, more vulnerable, and therefore not really cost effective in terms of delivering that capability. I mean, was that a common sort of finding when you chatted to people as you were sort of doing the rounds on this one?
That was one view. This was Dr. Marcus Hellier from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. He's an analyst there, and he was talking about Australia in particular, where they've chosen the Type 26 vessel, which is the same as the one that the Royal Navy is getting. But his view was that this focus on building these very high-end warships, but which are only very few in number. He said it was a failing business model. Looking at it from the point of view that you're, putting a lot of money, tens of billions over decades into a few number of high-end warships. In this case, Australia's getting 9, and he was sort of making the point that you've got an ASW capability, you've got an AAW capability, anti-surface warfare capability on these ships. You've only got 9 of them. So you can only put 3 to sea, possibly 4 at any one time. And in the vast expanses of the Indo-Pacific, where the Royal Australian Navy is operating, that's not very many ships. And in the future, with in the missile age, with hypersonic missiles and other threats to the surface fleet, these become high-end targets that could potentially get taken out. So his argument is, looking at autonomous systems, unmanned systems, and AI, that perhaps you might want to look at a different way of balancing your fleet with more capabilities and more ships, many more of them, smaller, cheaper, which are fitted with different types of specific capabilities. So it was a kind of different viewpoint of how you might structure your fleet, and how what the Australians, the problems they face is their budget is slightly smaller, so they're putting, they're very dedicated into creating this fleet of high-end warships, which is similar to those you'll see in Europe and the US, but they're dedicating pretty much all of their defence acquisition budget towards this over the course of the next couple of decades. It doesn't leave them much legroom to change in case the strategic landscape should change yet again and the new threats emerge, which would need countering in a very different way.
And I guess the other aspect that is worth highlighting is, if we look at the US in particular, we've seen a situation where they've made the decision more or less to retire the conventional frigates in favour of the LCS, the Littoral Combat Ship program, but then they haven't really taken that as far as the original proponents of that program sort of wanted, really. So, I mean, is it a case that their frigate numbers are down until we see the sort of new next generation of frigates come online?
With the United States, it's a kind of bit of a unique circumstance where they don't actually have any frigates at all. They did go for the Littoral Combat Ship, and it's not turned out how they wanted it. The original concept was a kind of small guided missile fast attack platform, really, which could engage in a which you could get many of them, and they could engage in coastal environments in a denied A2AD environment. So that didn't work out because the concept changed. The ships got a bit bigger. They kept the speed, but then they messed around with modularity, and they ended up with something that didn't fit any of the demands of the 21st century. So they are going back to a more traditional frigate program with more traditional frigate designs. Which obviously with the US Navy, with plenty of money to spend, they're going to be quite high-end, very capable, complex ships. So for the time being, it looks as if the US Navy is going to go back to the kind of more traditional multi-purpose frigate ships that are being built at the moment. But they are looking at the same time, they're looking at the A2, how to get into the A2AD environment, the denied areas and things as well. So they've got the luxury of being able to do that.
And I guess that latter point was, that's kind of underpinning a lot of the decision-making internationally. That seems to be sort of the main trend here, really, is looking at that sort of, the near-peer, peer-on-peer sort of conflict.
Yeah, what you have to look at is what other navies have, what threats they're developing. So in terms of what the future looks like, it's likely to be a slower transition towards what might be future platforms and future systems. Nick Childs from the International Institute of Strategic Studies, senior fellow there for Naval Forces, he was talking about how you're likely to see some of the new ships adapt into becoming sort of maybe a mothership for these kind of unmanned platforms and unmanned aerial and surface vehicles that could go out and provide a capability. But he was also quite keen to highlight the fact that even though the future is potentially unmanned and autonomous, you're always going to need manned ships at some level, because if you want to engage in the constabulary operations, the kind of operations that the lower end frigates and OPVs would engage in, whether it's counter piracy or countering illegal fishing and search and rescue and things like that, you're going to have a manned platform for those kinds of operations. So as programs move forward and as new technologies come on stream, we like to see sort of some of these types of ships become more flexible and take on a lot of these new systems and technologies in the future.
Sure. And I guess just to wrap things up, to anyone that's sort of met you over the years knows that you like a good debate. One of the things that kind of was highlighted in the article was that people were prepared to speak their mind about this and point out where they think things are going wrong. I mean, is this one of those topics that seemed to generate a lot of passion when you spoke to analysts and you sort of chatted to people across the industry?
Oh yeah, definitely. From the analysts who are quite passionate about making sure that defence spending is done in the right way and on the right kind of platforms. They were quite forthright in their views about what sort of platforms should be bought and the kind of spending that should be allocated, and also even from manufacturers as well. They're quite passionate about their particular frigate programs as well, and the navies themselves are very proud of the high-end new ships that they're getting. And they're looking forward to operating those in the future. So there's a lot of competing arguments out there, and a lot of it depends on how fast new technologies come on stream. It'll probably, as with defence procurement, all these things usually quite a bit of a slow burner. So it's likely to see sort of the slow transition that Nick Childs talked about. But in the case of Australia, it remains to be seen. By the time they get their new ships online, and submarines as well, over sort of a 20-30 year time frame, by the time these new ships are in service and operating, things may have changed considerably since in terms of the strategic environment compared to what we are now. So they're putting all their eggs in one basket, and it's a risk to a certain extent, but they aim to operate within an American alliance, so they're probably safe on those grounds for the time being.
So they'll probably be okay. So for readers who want to learn more about this topic, Tim's article is going to appear in the next issue of Naval Warfare magazine. You can go to the Shephard Media's website and register for a free digital copy. Tim, appreciate you taking time out from your parenting and your freelance duties, and I hope you have a good day over there in Auckland.
Yeah, we'll do. You too. Have a good one.
Thanks, matey.
The history of the helicopter is the story of a few key individuals that were able to overcome the technical challenges that made vertical flight possible. Those early pioneers created rotorcraft that would transform, enrich, and ultimately save lives.
Anything that one man can imagine, other men will make real.
He was the real pioneer of rotary wing aircraft, no two ways about it.
He wanted to apply that technique, and I wanted to apply my technique of working with my hands and getting something that operated.
I had no idea that anyone could build a heavier-than-air flying machine that could have all that freedom of flight. And it made me an absolute convert for life.
Welcome to Shephard Studios' Revolutions in Vertical Flight, sponsored by our partner, Bell. Over the course of 6 episodes, we will look at the history of vertical flight and discover the key individuals and revolutionary moments that created the rotorcraft industry that we know today. And we will take a look to the future. Consider how next-generation rotorcraft will shape the future battle space, and hear how innovation underway today will enable the urban air mobility of tomorrow.
One of the first trademarks of an innovator is to see opportunity where people don't see it yet.
It's definitely changing the way the warfighter fights and saving people's lives. So.
But if either A or B do not have a runway, then tilt rotor is definitely an option.
We are committed to helping build the foundation for eVTOL, and that's not about one winner, it's about having many winners.
That's Revolutions in Vertical Flight. The full series is available now, wherever you get your podcasts.
So one technology area that we've heard about a lot over the past year is that of artificial intelligence and machine learning. If you have a look at the Shephard Media's website, we ran a number of stories about this technology area sort of over the past 12 to 18 months with, examples of how the technology is being employed, both from the sort of military and industry sides. What is clear is that the AI technology is going to play a big role in the future. The US Army, for example, has already stated that it's going to be a priority for its Big Six modernization projects. I guess what's less clear is how the technology is going to be introduced, what kind of applications we're talking about, and really what the future is for this emerging technology area. So just to cast some light on the area, on the phone we've got Professor Paul Britton, who is the Chief Scientist at one of the L3 Harris facilities here in the UK. Paul, first of all, thanks for your time today.
Oh, good morning, Tony. Thank you.
So I know that you spoke at DSCI last year, about this subject, machine learning, battlefield decision-making, and where you, in terms of, future conflicts, where you sort of see this developing. I guess just to kick things off and set the scene a little bit, what was sort of the theme of your talk and where do you sort of see this area developing?
Yep. So one of the key things for us is that, we over the last 10 to 15 years, we've become very familiar with machine learning and artificial intelligence, sort of in our private lives, certainly within a commercial setting. But one of the questions we're asking is, how does that technology transition into a sort of a military stroke defence context? And the important thing really is it just on the ground at the tactical level, or can machine learning techniques be used both at the sort of strategic level, the operational and the tactical level? And that was really the emphasis of the talk at DESI last year.
And are you seeing a lot of activity in terms of on the military side? Are they investigating these areas? Are they trying to answer this question themselves at the moment, do you think?
I think we all recognise that machine learning has a really valuable place within the work we do, and I think what will probably happen is that machine learning will sort of evolve as our understanding of its capabilities evolve. So we're very comfortable with machine learning in our electronic assistants, so speech recognition. But there are a load of other places that machine learning is used in sort of, optimization of warehouses, route planning and things like that. So machine learning will start to appear, I think, from the ground up. And it's understanding what the pros and the cons of each one of the different machine learning techniques is, and where is its home within sort of the context that we work. So as an example of that, we hear an awful lot about deep learning techniques. These are sort of neural network techniques, and they've certainly, over the last 10 years, come to the front. And the performance of those techniques is absolutely fantastic. But one of the questions that we always need to ask is, how did the machine learning technique come up with the decision that it made? And what we know is that machine learning deep learning techniques, is very difficult sometimes to ask them how they made the decision. And that's important in our context about why the decision was made.
So can you, maybe it'd be good to perhaps talk about some examples in a military context. So, if we're talking about that sort of deep learning capability, what kind of applications at a practical level do you think the military could be using this for?
Yeah, so, from at the strategic level, then certainly, before a conflict starts, at a strategic level, there's going to be an awful lot of planning and a lot of sort of prediction about what your adversary might be doing. So a lot of sort of the game playing, role playing. At a tactical level, then the machine learning has an awful lot of promise in signal detection, signal classification, the fusion of data from multiple sensors, and sort of looking through the fog of war, trying to improve situation awareness, and try to predict what might be happening next.
And I guess when we've spoken to the military and other companies about this, I guess one of the things that they're keen to stress is there will still be a man in the loop in all these applications. What the technology can do is to present them with actionable data, clear out the noise, filter through, and just provide them what they need to, but not going as far as the kind of knee-jerk reaction that sort of machine learning AI means.
Yeah, I think you used an interesting phrase there, the man in the loop. I think that one of the things that sort of the wider community need to discuss is it man in the loop or man on the loop? And by that, if the man's on the loop, then have you delegated authority to the machine learning algorithm to actually do something on your behalf? And that's a big that's a big question. And so for us, the important thing is understanding the strengths and the weaknesses of the machine learning techniques and being very transparent about where they're actually being used. And then we can have a wider discussion about, are they the right techniques? Is the man in the loop or on the loop, is their position the correct one for any decision making? And that sort of comes back to the phrase about decision support. The machine is there to support the decision of the warfighter, and it's very, very important that.
I mean, do you think that answering that question in an operational context, is that where we are on this journey? I guess we've solved many of the technology problems. We've got the computing power now to be able to do this. So from the art of the possible, these kind of applications could be introduced. But are we at the stage now where the military is having to work through, okay, so what does this mean from a practical level? What are our operational concepts? And are we happy to be able to delegate some of these, tasks, to the machine?
Yeah. So I think one of the things which we're very cognizant of is that, over the last 10 to 15 years, a lot of the engagements have been asymmetric. There's been a disparity between the technology that one side has compared to the other side. If we look forward, then potential future conflicts are probably going to be up against a near peer or a peer threat. And so they're going to have technologies which are very, very similar to the ones that we have. And that sort of changes the dynamics of potentially future warfare. And we need to be sort of very cognizant of that the things that we hold dear about, the ethical use of machine learning, whether it's proportional, necessary, and legal, does our adversary play by those same rules? And we need to understand what's important to us and how our adversary would react.
And I guess another aspect that was sort of highlighted from your talk last year was the fact that in any future conflicts, and we've heard this a lot from military commanders, they may not be able to rely on the normal chain of commands, the normal communication systems. They won't have dominance necessarily of the air or of space. So I know there's a lot of, on the sort of cybersecurity, communication, C4I side, a lot of talk about how you would operate in that sort of environment. Does AI and machine learning provide advantages here, where if you lose a chain of command, that might not sort of necessarily matter as much?
Yeah. So I think that's a key point. A lot of the machine learning techniques that we use today are effectively through a portal to huge resources back in a data center. If you look forward into any future conflict, we may lose our strategic backhaul, we may lose our tactical comms, and we may lose our position, timing, and navigation. When we do that, when we lose those entities, then really the compute power and the machine learning needs to operate at the edge. And that has a sort of a profound impact, because suddenly the strategic commander, he has to propagate his intent to the fighting edge. But it may be that actually once the strategic backhaul is lost, all he can do is actually predict what's happening. And so that has a big change on what machine learning is done at the edge, because it has to be edge-based computing then, as opposed to sort of a centralized computing model, which is what we're more used to in sort of, the commercial world of running machine learning techniques.
And I mean, who do you think is going to be the champion of these technologies? When we look to the next sort of 10, 15, 20 years, and I guess where the money is going to be allocated, there's always a little fight for resources. I know, Paul, you come from an EW background. Is there one kind of sector within the military that's really flying the flag for these kind of technologies, or is it a case that they're applicable across the board, really?
I believe it's going to be across the board. One of the things that we need to be very conscious of is that over the last sort of 40, 50 years of machine learning, the whole sort of concept has gone through a lot of hype cycles. And I think we're just at the edge, or just coming off at the top of one of the hype cycles within artificial intelligence. So a lot of the work that we do is setting expectations about what can and can't be done with machine learning techniques. And so I think we need to be very mindful when we look forward and talk about machine learning and artificial intelligence over the next 5 to 10 years, because there's an awful lot of promise. But at the end of the day, it's the techniques can only do what they can do. Sure.
I mean, that's a great phrase, hype cycle. I'm gonna steal that for sure. Yeah, I mean, I guess I was looking on the website and for some concrete examples, and we are beginning to see them. The US Army has got an experimentation on how they can use AI and apply it to its robotic platforms. In one example, the Royal Australian Air Force is looking at how AI can help improve its airborne search and rescue operations, which on the face of it seems like a great use of the technology. So, so I guess we are seeing some of those studies kind of filter through and show how the technology can be applied in real world situations.
Very, very much. And, from our perspective, the whole sort of increasing situational awareness, and the important thing about reducing the cognitive burden on the warfighter is so important. That, they're being bombarded with so many sensors, and how do you prioritize the threats that are out there? And so the whole sort of signal detection, classification, data fusion, increasing situational awareness is so important. And they're areas that, machine learning can be applied to and can make a positive contribution.
Great, Paul. I mean, this is one of those ones we could talk about all day, I'm sure. But for now, we'll leave it there. I guess we'll get you back on the podcast when the problem's completely solved and, and we're seeing AI comfortably fielded across the board.
Well, thank you very much, Tony.
Thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
All right, cheers. Bye-bye.
So welcome to this week's Industry Voice segment. As regular listeners will know, this is a part of the show that's brought to you in partnership with our sponsor, Nemo. On the line, I've got our regular contributor, Andre Lond, who's the SVP of Communications for Nemo. So good afternoon, Andre.
Good afternoon. Happy New Year to you and to the podcast listeners.
And happy New Year to yourself. So I guess as we move into the new year, the defence industry is kind of looking at 2020, and I guess the thought that's on your mind this week is how they're approaching the sort of design and branding that kind of goes along with that. So kind of what sparked that sort of thought off?
Yeah, exactly. Well, This week we did our annual kind of refresh of our design manual. We've had one in place now for a couple of years that we developed, and it's just like updating a couple of small things and making sure people are aware of what direction we're going. But I also saw one company that did something far more radical, where Northrop Grumman came out earlier this week with a completely new graphical profile, a new brand profile. And it made me think a little bit about how we, in general, in the defense industry, are approaching this. And it made me also question, do we actually have a purpose with design and branding? Do we actually use it to any sort of value or want to achieve something by it? Or is it something we have simply because, we rather have one brand than having lots of confusing things? It's better to have it than not. Is that really the extent of it? And sometimes it's really hard to see what we're really trying to achieve. It doesn't seem like some companies really have an ambition beyond just having one. And I think that's a shame, because at that point we're not really taking advantage of the opportunities that this represents even for companies such as ourselves.
So, just for the benefit of the listeners, I guess Northrop Grumman moved from what was a kind of swoosh, I guess, underneath their name, to what now is a very sort of hard right angle, which themselves have called the forward mark. And on their website, they've got a whole explanation of how that kind of relates to their brands, and like most companies, that's sort of full of the kind of corporate speak as they try and define what they're about. I think it's really easy to be cynical about this stuff, but I think you can understand why the big primes especially might struggle to define coherently what they're about when they might be involved in land, sea and air technologies, government, military, commercial, customer base. Being able to sort of condense that down, distill that down into sort of one message must be pretty difficult.
Of course, it doesn't get easier the bigger you are, but I've seen very small companies that have the same issue. So it's not necessarily a question of how big you are. But of course, it should be a bit of a concern to many of us. And this probably comes as it's going to be a bigger issue as the defense industry consolidates more and more into larger and larger conglomerates, and a few big players left really among the big primes. Then they become a little bit everything to everyone within their sector. And perhaps not surprising, like you said, at that point that they do struggle to define what they're about. But as anyone who's been working with branding knows, that at that point, that's usually when you're supposed to sit down and ask, do we need to split up this brand? Do we need to have sub-brands? Do we need to have, for instance, take out the parts of our business that direct itself towards the civilian market or towards space? Should that be operating on a different brand? Should that be trying to cultivate a different customer group? After all, a key thing for the defense industry is that we are really a trust industry, a relationship industry. We have very, very long contracts. We have long-standing relationships with customers. Once you sell a major system, you'll be expected to provide service and support for almost decades. And at that point, maintaining that trust and support as a provider is essential. And that's really, really what a lot of the branding philosophy is about. So if you have too broad portfolio and too broad definition of what your brand is, that's not really going to be an asset for you as you're developing those relationships and maintaining them.
I guess 10 or 15 years ago, we saw a lot of the big primes positioning themselves as system integrators. That was kind of the buzzword, and I guess that was when a lot of technologies were being sort of networked together. So the idea of being a systems integrator wasn't attractive from a technology solution point of view. But I guess also it was a great way for companies with all these, many different strands of technology to be able to say, this is what we do. We sort of pull technology together. So
but you look at those companies today, they've consolidated so much and acquired so many different companies that they do everything from tiny components and bullets and energetics, all the way up to these massive, large systems programs where they, like you said, are integrating multiple different technologies and systems and often help run them as well. At that point, you have a very, very broad portfolio, and it's hard to find one brand that can adopt this and can be kind of the overall name and concept that covers all of this. I mean, just look at Google. What they decided to do was to split out the mother company, the holding company, into Alphabet, and then maintain Google as the brand used for the online services that they provide. But of course, Alphabet invests in many other things as well. So that they kind of split this out, but we haven't seen that similar trend really in defense, and it becomes a question: do we use branding and design effectively in defense, and is there a different way we could be doing it, which would be a better way of using the tools available in this area to build those relationships and that trust and connection with the target groups that we really need to maintain our position.
And I guess given the consolidation we've seen over the last couple of years, there's a number of companies now that are probably having those internal conversations, based on the kind of mergers and acquisitions that have taken place.
Yeah, and I think that also comes down to how do we have a clear definition, understanding who our customers really are and who we're really trying to reach with this. That's another thing that I think about when I look at a lot of defense industry websites. Who's the target group for this website? Who are they trying to reach with this? Who is this supposed to be useful for?
And just to wrap things up, I guess personally I knew that NAMO stood for the Nordic Ammunition Company, was the original name. Right. It was only, I think, maybe 18 months ago that I realised that the O of NAMO had a bullet inside it in terms of your corporate logo. How disappointed are you that it took me that long to spot that? Which I must admit, now that I've spotted it, that's all I can see every time I look at your logo. So,
well, the only thing the reassurance is that I'm not quite sure you'll be able to describe that many other logos in detail either, do you? So again, my original point stands that how effective are companies in their branding, how much emphasis are we putting into our design, and are we using it well enough? Well, if you couldn't name our logo or couldn't describe that, or you can't do it than many other defense companies, then I think really that just underlines my point. We have a job to do.
Sure. Andrew, we'll leave it there, mate, and wrap things up. And we'll speak next time. Thank you very much.
Will do. Thank you. Bye-bye.
This episode of the Weekly Defence Podcast was brought to you in partnership with our sponsor, NAMO. As always, a big thank you to everyone who took time to be part of the episode. And for our listeners, make sure you like and subscribe, leave a review on iTunes, and tell a friend or colleague about the podcast. Until next week, thanks for listening.